The summer of 1948 was blistering hot. The heat rose off the asphalt of Harlem in shimmering waves, distorting the air and making tempers short. It was the kind of heat that made people sweat even when they were standing still, the kind of heat that made the nights feel dangerous because the city never truly cooled down. But for Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the heat wasn't the problem. The problem was the wind of change blowing down from the Italian neighborhoods, carrying with it a new kind of threat. The old guard of the mafia, men like Lucky Luciano and Frank Costello, had operated with a certain grim code. They were businessmen first, killers second. They understood that unnecessary violence was bad for the bottom line, and they respected the boundaries of the map that Bumpy had carved out with his own blood and sweat. But the old guard was shifting, and a new generation was rising up to take their place. They were younger, hungrier, and infinitely more reckless. They didn't care about treaties or handshakes. They cared about flash, about reputation, and about taking what they wanted simply because they were strong enough to take it. At the forefront of this new breed was a man named Vinnie Moretti. On the street they called him Vinnie the Razor. He didn't look like a monster. In fact, he looked like he had just walked off a movie set in Hollywood. He was tall, with jet black hair that was always slicked back to perfection, and a smile that could charm the diamonds off a wealthy widow's neck. He wore three-piece suits that cost more than most men in Harlem made in a year, tailored to accentuate his broad shoulders. He smelled of expensive cologne and imported tobacco. To the casual observer, Vinnie Moretti was a gentleman. But the people who really knew him, the people who operated in the shadows of the city, knew the truth. They knew that behind that movie star smile lay a soul that was black and rotten. They knew about the nickname. He didn't carry a gun, at least not usually. He preferred something more intimate. Tucked inside the silk band of his fedora, or sometimes stitched into the stiff collar of his shirt, was a straight razor. It was a barber's tool, sharp enough to split a hair in two, and in Vinnie's hands, it was an instrument of terror. He didn't just hurt people, he marked them. He wanted them to remember him every time they looked in a mirror. Bumpy Johnson knew about Vinnie Moretti. He had been watching the young upstarts rise with a wary eye. Vinnie had been making noise on the fringes of Harlem, pushing his way into the numbers racket, testing the fences to see if they would hold. Bumpy had sent warnings. He had sent messengers to the heads of the 5 families, reminding them of the agreements that kept the peace in New York. The old dons had nodded and promised to rein in their wild dog. But Bumpy knew better. You couldn't teach a wolf to be a house pet. Bumpy sat in his office at the back of the Blue Velvet Lounge, the air thick with cigar smoke. He was looking at a ledger, but his mind was elsewhere. His wife, Mamie, was 8 months pregnant. The thought filled him with a mixture of overwhelming joy and terrifying vulnerability. Bumpy had spent his life building a fortress, making himself invincible. But a child was a chink in the armor. A child was something the world could use to hurt him. He picked up the phone and dialed the number for the penthouse. It rang 4 times before the maid answered. "Is Mrs. Johnson there?" Bumpy asked, his voice low. "No, sir," the maid replied. "She went out about an hour ago. She said she needed to do some shopping for the baby." Bumpy felt a small knot of tension tighten in his stomach. Where did she go? "She said she was going downtown, sir, to Saks Fifth Avenue. She said the selection in Harlem wasn't what she wanted for the nursery. Bumpy exhaled slowly. Midtown. Neutral ground. The unwritten rules of the underworld stated that the civilian areas, the high-end shopping districts where the politicians and the bankers spent their money, were off-limits for gang violence. Mamie should be safe there. It was broad daylight in one of the busiest stores in the city. "Okay," Bumpy said. "When she gets back, tell her to call me immediately." He hung up the phone, trying to push the worry aside. Mamie was a strong woman. She walked with the confidence of a queen, and people generally knew better than to mess with the wife of Bumpy Johnson. But the image of Vinnie Moretti, with his cold smile and his hidden razor, flickered in the back of Bumpy's mind like a warning light. Downtown, the air conditioning in Saks Fifth Avenue was a welcome relief from the oppressive heat of the street. Mamie Johnson moved through the aisles of the children's department, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her stomach. She felt heavy, tired, but incredibly happy. For years, she and Bumpy had navigated the storms of his life, but this baby felt like a new beginning. It was a promise that there was a future beyond the numbers racket and the turf wars. She picked up a tiny yellow sweater, running her fingers over the soft wool. It was impossible to imagine that a human being could be so small. She smiled to herself, imagining Bumpy with his large, scarred hands, trying to button something so delicate. The thought made her laugh softly. "Mrs. Johnson?" The voice came from behind her. It was smooth, rich, and polite. Mamie turned around, expecting to see a sales clerk offering assistance. Instead, she found herself looking up at a man she had never met, but instantly recognized. The descriptions Bumpy had given her, the whispers she had heard from Silas and Whispers, painted a picture that matched the man standing before her perfectly. He was handsome, devastatingly so. His suit was a dark charcoal gray, cut to perfection. His hat was held in his hands, resting against his chest in a gesture of mock humility. His hair gleamed under the store lights, but it was his eyes that gave him away. They were dark, flat, and completely devoid of the warmth that his smile projected. "Vincent Moretti," Mamie said, her voice steady. She didn't back away. She stood her ground, channeling the steel that she had learned from her husband. Vinnie's smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth. "I am honored that you know my name, Mrs. Johnson. Truly honored. Your husband is a legend in this city, a giant. I have always admired giants." "What do you want, Mr. Moretti?" Mamie asked. "This is a department store. I am shopping for my child." "I can see that," Vinnie said, his eyes dropping to her stomach for a brief, uncomfortable second, before snapping back to her face. "A blessing, truly. Children are the future, aren't they? That is actually what I wanted to talk to you about. The future." "I don't discuss business," Mamie said, turning back to the display table. "And neither does my husband. Not in places like this. If you want to speak to Bumpy, you know where to find him." "Oh, I know where to find him," Vinnie said, taking a step closer. He invaded her personal space, bringing with him the scent of expensive sandalwood and unspoken violence. "But Bumpy is, how should I put this? He is set in his ways. He is an old tree with deep roots, and sometimes old trees block the light for the saplings trying to grow." Mamie turned to face him again, her eyes flashing with anger. "Are you threatening him?" "No, never," Vinnie said, raising a hand in mock protest. "I am simply worried. The world is changing, Mrs. Johnson. It is becoming faster, sharper. Men like Bumpy, they rely on honor. They rely on respect. But the new world doesn't care about respect. It cares about strength. I just wanted to suggest that perhaps it is time for Bumpy to retire, to enjoy his golden years, to focus on being a father. He reached out and touched the yellow sweater Mamie was still holding. His fingers were long and manicured. He brushed the fabric, but the gesture felt like a violation. Because it would be a tragedy, Vinnie continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like silk sliding over a tombstone. If something were to happen that prevented him from enjoying fatherhood. The city is a dangerous place. Accidents happen every day. People trip. People fall. Mamie slapped his hand away. The sound was sharp and loud in the quiet department store. "Don't you touch that," she hissed, "and don't you dare threaten my family. You are a cheap suit with a loud mouth, Moretti. Bumpy has forgotten more about this city than you will ever know. Now get out of my way." She grabbed her purse and pushed past him, heading toward the escalators. Her heart was hammering in her chest, but she refused to let him see her fear. She needed to get to a phone. She needed to call Bumpy. Vinnie stood there for a moment, looking at his hand where she had slapped him. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, reptile fury. His vanity was his weak point, and she had just bruised it in public. He placed his hat back on his head, adjusting the brim. He turned and followed her. Mamie reached the landing of the grand staircase. The elevators were too far, and she wanted to be in the open, where people could see her. She hurried toward the marble steps that led down to the main floor. She sensed him behind her before she heard him. The click of his dress shoes on the marble was rapid, closing the distance. "Mrs. Johnson!" Vinnie called out. Mamie didn't stop. She reached the top of the stairs, her hand reaching for the brass railing. Vinnie caught up to her. He didn't grab her. He didn't punch her. He moved alongside her, matching her pace. "You should have listened," he whispered. And then, with a motion that was almost casual, he lowered his shoulder and shoved her. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't an accident. It was a calculated, forceful push, directed squarely at her side. Mamie gasped as she lost her footing. The world tilted violently. Her hand scrabbled for the railing, but the leather of her gloves slipped on the polished brass. Her feet went out from under her. For a terrifying second, she was weightless, suspended over the long, steep drop of the marble staircase. Her only thought was for the baby. She tried to twist her body, to curl up, to take the impact on her back rather than her stomach. She screamed. It was a sound of pure, primal terror that echoed off the high ceilings of the store. She fell backward, bracing for the shattering impact of the stone steps, bracing for the end of everything. But the impact never came. A blur of motion shot out from the side of the landing. It was a young man, a boy really, wearing the tan uniform of a stock clerk. He had been stacking boxes near the display, and he had seen the man in the suit lunge at the woman. The boy didn't think. He reacted. He threw his body between Mamie and the hard edges of the steps, bracing himself against the railing. He caught her as she tumbled, his arm hooked around her waist, acting as an anchor. The momentum slammed them both hard against the heavy brass banister, but instead of tumbling down the flight of stairs, they skidded to a halt on the first landing. The boy took the full force of the collision against the metal railing. A sickening crunch echoed as his shoulder hit the brass, but he didn't let go. He held Mamie steady, keeping her from hitting the stone. Silence descended on the department store. Shoppers froze. The music seemed to stop. Mamie was gasping for air, her eyes squeezed shut, her hands clutching her stomach. She waited for the pain. She waited for the darkness. But all she felt was the heavy breathing of the boy beside her, and the solid ache of her hip where it had bumped the railing. Are you okay, ma'am?" the boy grunted, his face twisted in pain. Mamie opened her eyes. She was alive. She looked down at her stomach. No impact, no pain. She looked at the boy. He was young, maybe 19, with terrified eyes and a name tag that read, Leon. I think so," Mamie stammered. She looked up at the top of the stairs. Vinnie Moretti was standing there. He wasn't running. He wasn't panicking. He was adjusting his cufflinks. He looked down at them, a look of mild disappointment on his face, as if a horse he had bet on had just stumbled at the gate. He caught Mamie's eye. He winked, a slow, deliberate wink that chilled her blood more than the fall would have. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of shoppers as if he had never been there. Chaos erupted a second later. People rushed forward. Sales clerks were screaming for a doctor, but Mamie couldn't hear them. All she could hear was the blood rushing in her ears and the terrifying realization of what had almost happened. Back in Harlem, the phone in the Blue Velvet Lounge rang. Bumpy picked it up on the first ring. "Johnson." It was a woman's voice on the other end, not Mamie. It was a nurse. "Mr. Johnson, this is Lenox Hill Hospital. Your wife has been admitted." The world stopped. The noise of the club, the traffic outside, the ticking of the clock, it all vanished into a vacuum of silence. Bumpy felt a cold hand grip his heart. "Is she?" "She is awake, Mr. Johnson. She is stable, but you need to come." Bumpy didn't say goodbye. He dropped the phone. He didn't run. He exploded into motion. "Whispers! Get the car!" The drive to the hospital was a blur of run-red lights and screeching tires. Bumpy sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, his face a mask of stone. His mind was racing through the possibilities. If she was dead, if the baby was dead, he would burn the city to the ground. He would kill everyone. He would start a war that would make the history books look like fairy tales. When he burst into the hospital room, the sight that greeted him almost brought him to his knees. Mamie was sitting up in the bed. She looked pale. Her hair was a mess, and her hands were trembling, but she was whole. There were no bandages, no machines. Bumpy rushed to her side, falling onto the chair next to the bed. He grabbed her hands, running his eyes over her face, her arms, her stomach. "Mamie? Mamie, look at me. Are you hurt? The baby?" "I'm okay, Bumpy," she whispered, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "We're okay. The doctors checked. The heartbeat is strong, just bruised and scared." Bumpy let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He pressed his forehead against her hand, closing his eyes. "Thank God. Thank God." He stayed there for a moment, letting the terror drain away, leaving only the cold, hard rage in its place. He lifted his head. "What happened, Mamie? The nurse said you fell." Mamie looked at him. Her eyes hardened. "I didn't fall, Bumpy. I was pushed." Bumpy went very still. "Pushed?" "At the store, on the stairs. He was there. He followed me." "Who?" Bumpy asked, his voice dropping to a subsonic growl. "The pretty one," Mamie said, her voice shaking with residual anger. "The one with the suits. Moretti." Vinnie Moretti. Bumpy stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. He walked to the window and looked out. Vinnie Moretti. The upstart. The barber. He had touched his wife. He had tried to kill his child. "He told me to tell you to retire," Mamie said. "He said, accidents happen." Then he shoved me, Bumpy. He looked me in the eye, and he shoved me down the stairs. How did you survive?" Bumpy asked, turning back to her. "A fall like that?" "I didn't hit the stairs," Mamie said. "A boy caught me, a stock clerk. He braced me against the railing. He took the hit. He saved us, Bumpy." Bumpy looked at her. "Where is this boy?" "He is down the hall. They are checking his shoulder. I think he broke his collarbone." Bumpy nodded. He walked over to Mamie and kissed her forehead. It was a gentle kiss, tender and full of promise. "Rest, Mamie. I will be back." He walked out of the room. Whispers was standing in the hallway, looking anxious. "Is she okay, boss?" "She is alive," Bumpy said, his voice flat. Moretti pushed her. Whisper's eyes went wide. "The razor? He pushed Mrs. Johnson?" Bumpy didn't answer. He walked down the hall to the nurse's station. "Where's the boy who came in with my wife, the clerk?" "Room 304, the nurse said, looking a little frightened by Bumpy's intensity. Bumpy walked into room 304. A young black kid was sitting on the edge of the bed, his arm in a sling. He looked nervous, holding an ice pack to his neck. When he saw Bumpy enter, his eyes widened in recognition. Everyone in Harlem knew Bumpy Johnson. "Mr. Johnson," the boy stammered, standing up. "Sit down, son," Bumpy said. The boy sat. I hope Mrs. Johnson is okay. I tried to catch her as best I could, but it happened so fast." "What is your name?" Bumpy asked. "Leon, sir. Leon Davis." Bumpy reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a thick envelope. It was the payroll for the numbers runners, thousands of dollars in cash. He tossed it onto the bed next to Leon. Leon looked at the money, then at Bumpy. "Sir?" "That is for you," Bumpy said. "That is for your shoulder. That is for your time. And that is for saving my world." "It's too much, sir," Leon said, shaking his head. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Bumpy said, stepping closer. "Most people would have watched. Most people would have been too scared to move. You moved. You took a hit meant for my wife. You are a man, Leon, a better man than the one who pushed her. Buy yourself a car. Buy your mother a house. Go to college. Do whatever you want. But know that Bumpy Johnson is in your debt. And I always pay my debts." "Thank you, sir," Leon whispered. Bumpy nodded and turned to leave. He stopped at the door. "Did you see him? The man who did it?" "Yes, sir," Leon said, his face darkening. "Guy in a gray suit, slick hair. He winked at me after it happened. Like it was a game." Bumpy's hand clenched into a fist on the door frame. The wood creaked under the pressure. "It was a game to him," Bumpy said softly. "But he just played his last turn." Bumpy walked back out to the hallway. Whispers fell in step beside him. "What's the play, boss?" Whispers asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I can have the boys round up a crew. We can hit the Italian club tonight. Burn it down. Put a bullet in Moretti's head before he finishes his pasta." Bumpy stopped in the middle of the corridor. People swerved to avoid them. The aura of violence coming off Bumpy was palpable. No, Bumpy said. No? Whispers looked confused. Boss, he touched your wife. He tried to kill the baby. You want to let him slide? I didn't say I was going to let him slide, Bumpy said, turning to look at his lieutenant. His eyes were like chips of flint. If we shoot him, Whispers, it's over in a second. One bullet, lights out. He doesn't feel anything. He doesn't know why. Bumpy began to walk again, faster now, heading toward the exit. He terrified my wife. He made her scream. He made her think her child was dying. A bullet is too good for him. A bullet is mercy. And I am fresh out of mercy. So what are we going to do? Whispers asked, struggling to keep up with Bumpy's long strides. We are going to make an example, Bumpy said. We aren't going to war with the 5 families. We aren't going to start a street battle. This isn't business. This is personal. They burst out of the hospital doors into the oppressive heat of the afternoon. Bumpy stopped at the car. He looked across the city skyline toward the Italian neighborhoods. Take me to the club, Bumpy ordered. The ride back to Harlem was silent. Bumpy didn't look at the city passing by. He was visualizing the Italian social club on Pleasant Avenue. He knew the layout. He knew who would be there. Vinnie Moretti would be sitting at his favorite table, drinking espresso, laughing with his sycophants. He would be bragging. He would be telling them how he scared the great Bumpy Johnson's wife. He would be feeling invincible. Good. Let him feel invincible. It would make the fall that much harder. When they arrived at the Blue Velvet, Bumpy didn't go to his office. He went to the back room where they kept the supplies. He took off his suit jacket and hung it carefully on a hanger. He unbuttoned his cufflinks and placed them in his pocket. He rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt, revealing the thick, powerful forearms of a man who had spent years lifting weights in a prison yard. He reached into a corner and picked up a walking stick. It wasn't a cane for a limp. It was a solid piece of hickory, polished and heavy, with a brass knob at the top. It was a gentleman's accessory, but in the wrong hands, it was a bone breaker. He put on a pair of black leather gloves, pulling them tight over his knuckles. Whispers watched him, realizing what was happening. Boss, you can't go down there alone. That's Pleasant Avenue. That's Moretti's turf. There will be 20 guys in that club. I'm not going alone, Bumpy said, testing the weight of the stick. You and Silas are coming with me. But you aren't there to fight. Then what are we there for? You are there to keep the audience in their seats, Bumpy said. I want Moretti to myself. If anyone else tries to jump in, you put them down. But Moretti belongs to me. Bumpy walked out of the club, the hickory stick tapping rhythmically against his leg. He looked like a man going for a stroll, but the set of his jaw promised apocalypse. Moretti wanted to be famous. He wanted to be the man who took down Bumpy Johnson. He wanted a reputation. Bumpy was going to give him one. He was going to give him a reputation as the man who learned the hard way that you never, ever touch the Queen. The drive to Pleasant Avenue took 20 minutes. The car stopped a block away from the social club. It was a storefront with shaded windows, the sound of Italian opera drifting out onto the street. Men in suits stood outside, smoking cigarettes, watching the street. When Bumpy Johnson got out of the car, the conversation on the corner stopped. The men stared. They couldn't believe their eyes. It was Bumpy Johnson, the king of Harlem, and he was walking down their street in broad daylight without a suit jacket, carrying a stick. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He was marching. Whispers and Silas flanked him, carrying Tommy guns under their long coats. But Bumpy didn't look at them. He looked straight ahead, at the door of the club. One of the lookouts tossed his cigarette and reached inside his jacket. Bumpy didn't break stride. He just pointed the stick at the man. "Don't," Bumpy said. The single word carried so much authority, so much promised violence, that the man froze. He let his hand drop. He stepped aside. Bumpy reached the door of the club. He didn't knock. He didn't ask for permission. He raised his leg and kicked the door open with a crash that shattered the glass pane. The music stopped. The conversation inside died instantly. 20 men turned to look at the door. At the back of the room, sitting at the head of a large table with a plate of pasta in front of him, was Vinnie Moretti. Vinnie looked up, a forkful of food halfway to his mouth. He saw Bumpy standing in the doorway, framed by the afternoon sun, a silhouette of vengeance. Vinnie blinked. Then, slowly, a smirk spread across his face. He put the fork down. He wiped his mouth with a napkin. He stood up, adjusting his tie. "Well, well," Vinnie said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Look who came to visit. You look lost, old man. This isn't Harlem. You're a long way from home." Bumpy stepped inside, the hickory stick tapping on the tile floor. Whispers and Silas stepped in behind him, closing the door and blocking the exit. They opened their coats, revealing the submachine guns. The other men in the room started to stand, reaching for weapons, but they froze when they saw the heavy artillery. "Sit down," Whispers barked. "This ain't about you." Bumpy didn't look at the other men. He locked eyes with Vinnie. "I'm not lost, Vinnie," Bumpy said, his voice calm, terrifyingly calm. "I know exactly where I am. I'm in the room with the man who pushed my wife." Vinnie laughed. It was a nervous laugh, but he tried to hide it with bravado. "I don't know what you're talking about, Bumpy. Pushed? That's a strong word. Maybe she tripped. Maybe she's clumsy. Pregnant women, their balance is off, you know?" Bumpy continued to walk forward, slow and steady. He moved tables out of his way with his free hand, clearing a path. "You winked at the stock boy," Bumpy said. "You thought it was funny." Vinnie shrugged, stepping out from behind the table. He reached up and touched the brim of his hat. He wasn't afraid. He was young. He was fast. And he had the razor. "I think you should leave, Bumpy," Vinnie said, his hand lingering near his hatband. "Before you get hurt. You're an old man. You shouldn't be out in this heat. Go home to your wife. While you still can." Bumpy stopped 10 feet away from him. He gripped the hickory stick with both hands. "I'm not here for territory, Vinnie. I'm not here for money. I'm here for an apology." "An apology?" Vinnie scoffed. "You want me to say sorry?" "No," Bumpy said. "I don't want you to say it." Bumpy's eyes narrowed. "I want you to scream it." The heavy oak door of the social club swung shut behind Whispers and Silas, sealing the room off from the bustling sounds of Pleasant Avenue. Inside, the air was stagnant, thick with the scent of stale cigar smoke, espresso, and the sharp, metallic tang of sudden fear. 20 men stood frozen in various states of readiness. Some had hands inside their jackets, gripping pistols they were now too terrified to draw. Others were staring slack-jawed at the 2 submachine guns leveled at them by Bumpy's lieutenants. The light filtering in through the dusty Venetian blinds cut the room into stripes of shadow and gold, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. But Bumpy Johnson ignored the atmosphere. He ignored the guards. His world had narrowed down to a single point of focus: the man in the charcoal suit standing at the head of the table. Vinnie Moretti stood motionless, his chest heaving slightly. The arrogance that usually fit him like a second skin was beginning to fray at the seams. He looked at Bumpy, then at the hickory walking stick resting casually on Bumpy's shoulder, then at the exits blocked by men with heavy artillery. He ran the calculations in his head, the same cold, predatory calculations he used for numbers running and extortion schemes, and he realized, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that the math didn't work. There was no profit here, only debt, and the collector had come calling. "You want me to scream?" Vinnie asked, his voice cracking just enough to betray him. He tried to force a laugh, but it came out as a dry, rattling cough. "You think you can walk in here, into my house, and give orders? You're forgetting who I am, old man. I'm the future." Bumpy took a step forward. The sound of his shoe on the tile floor echoed like a gavel strike in a silent courtroom. He didn't rush. He moved with the inevitable, crushing pace of a glacier. "The future is a long way off," Bumpy said, his voice calm, terrifyingly steady. "And looking at you now, Vinnie, I don't think you're going to make it there." Vinnie's eyes darted around the room, looking for support from his crew, searching for anyone who would be foolish enough to die for him. "Sal, Mickey, what are you doing? There's 3 of them! Rush them! Take them down!" Sal, the thick-necked capo nearest to Silas, shifted his weight, his hand twitching toward his waistband. Silas didn't blink. He simply tilted the barrel of the Thompson submachine gun down an inch, aiming directly at Sal's kneecaps. Sal froze. He looked at the weapon, then at Silas's cold, dead eyes, and he realized the truth. This is between the kings. The pawns stay out of it. Sal raised his empty hands slowly, signaling his surrender. Vinnie saw the betrayal in his men's eyes. He realized, with a jolt of cold terror, that loyalty in his world was rented, not owned. Bumpy Johnson commanded respect. Vinnie Moretti only commanded a payroll. And right now, the payroll was closed. "Fine," Vinnie spat, his hand twitching near his lapel. "You want to do this the hard way? You think because you beat Dutch Schultz back in the Dark Ages that you can handle me? You're slow, Bumpy. You're tired. You're a museum piece." "I might be old," Bumpy said, tightening his grip on the hickory stick, "but I'm not the one shaking." It was true. Vinnie's hand was trembling. The adrenaline was dumping into his system too fast, making him jittery, making his movements jagged. He needed to move. He needed to strike before the fear paralyzed him completely. "Go to hell!" Vinnie screamed. He moved faster than Bumpy expected. It was the speed of youth, explosive and reckless. Vinnie's hand blurred as it dipped into his collar. In a fraction of a second, the straight razor was in his grip, the blade flashing silver in the dim light. He didn't telegraph the move. He lunged across the table, scattering coffee cups and ashtrays, aiming the razor directly at Bumpy's left eye. It was a kill shot, a move designed to end the fight before it began. But Bumpy Johnson had spent a lifetime in the ring, both inside the ropes and out on the pavement. He didn't flinch away from the blade. He stepped into the attack. He dropped his left shoulder, tucking his chin. The razor hissed through the air where his face had been a millisecond before, slicing through the fabric of his white shirt and drawing a thin, burning line of blood across his upper arm. "Boss!" Whispers shouted, taking a step forward, his finger tightening on the trigger of his gun. "Stay back," Bumpy roared, never taking his eyes off Vinnie. "He is mine." Vinnie landed on the balls of his feet, turning instantly to slash again. He grinned, seeing the blood. "I drew first blood, old man. You feel that? That's your life leaking out." Bumpy glanced at the red stain spreading on his sleeve. He felt the sting, sharp and hot, but it was distant, irrelevant. Pain was just information. It told him where the enemy was. It told him the fight had truly begun. "You missed," Bumpy said. He swung the hickory stick. He didn't swing it wildly. He swung it with the precision of a carpenter driving a nail. The heavy brass knob at the end of the stick whistled through the air and connected with Vinnie's wrist, the one holding the razor. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud, like a dry branch snapping in a winter storm. It reverberated off the tiled walls, making the men in the room flinch. Vinnie howled. The razor flew from his hand, skittering across the floor and sliding under a booth. He clutched his wrist, stumbling back, his face twisting into a mask of shock. The bone was broken. The wrist hung at an unnatural angle, limp and useless. "That," Bumpy said, stepping over the broken porcelain on the floor, "was for the first second of fear you caused my wife." Vinnie scrambled backward, knocking over a chair. He was hyperventilating now, the pain cutting through his adrenaline like a knife. "You broke my wrist, you crazy son of a—" "I'm just getting started," Bumpy said, his voice devoid of pity. "You have 206 bones in your body, Vinnie. We have a long way to go." Vinnie looked around frantically. He saw a heavy glass liquor bottle on a nearby table. Desperation overrode his pain. He grabbed the bottle with his good hand and smashed it against the edge of the table, creating a jagged glass shiv. Liquid splashed onto the floor, smelling of anise and alcohol. "Stay away from me!" Vinnie shrieked, brandishing the broken bottle. "I'll cut you! I'll cut your heart out!" Bumpy didn't stop walking. He held the hickory stick casually at his side. "You threaten a man with a weapon, you better be ready to use it. But you aren't a warrior, Vinnie. You're a bully. And bullies don't know what to do when the victim doesn't fall down." Vinnie lunged again, a clumsy, sweeping arc with the jagged glass. Bumpy sidestepped it easily. He was reading Vinnie's movements like a large print book. As Vinnie overextended, exposing his flank, Bumpy brought the stick down hard on his right shoulder. The collarbone gave way with a wet crunch. Vinnie dropped the bottle. His right arm went dead, hanging uselessly at his side. He fell to his knees, gasping for air, unable to scream because the shock had seized his lungs. He looked up at Bumpy, his eyes wide and wet with tears. The arrogance was gone. The movie star facade had crumbled, leaving only a terrified boy in a ruined suit. Bumpy stood over him. He wasn't breathing hard. He looked immaculate, save for the blood on his sleeve. He looked like a judge delivering a sentence. "That," Bumpy said, looking down at the sobbing man, "was for the bruise on her hip." Vinnie wheezed, trying to crawl away. He dragged himself across the dirty floor using his elbows, leaving a trail of sweat and tears. "Please," Vinnie whispered. "Bumpy, Mr. Johnson, I'll pay you. I have money in the safe. Take it all. 50,000. Just let me go." Bumpy sighed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. He wiped a speck of dust from the hickory stick. "You think this is a transaction?" Bumpy asked. his voice filled with disappointment. "You think you can buy your way out of disrespect? You pushed a pregnant woman, Vinnie. You tried to buy a ticket to hell, and now you want a refund?" "I'm sorry!" Vinnie screamed, snot running down his nose. "I'm sorry! I won't ever touch her! I won't ever say her name!" "I know you won't," Bumpy said. "But apologies are just words, and words are cheap. Pain is a memory that lasts. Pain is a teacher." Bumpy shifted his grip on the stick. "Stand up." "I can't," Vinnie sobbed. "Stand up." Vinnie struggled to his feet, swaying unsteadily. His arms were useless, one broken at the wrist, the other at the shoulder. He stood there, defenseless, waiting for the killing blow. He closed the eyes, expecting the stick to crack his skull. He prayed for it. He wanted the lights to go out. But Bumpy didn't aim for the head. Bumpy Johnson was a strategist. He knew that a dead enemy is forgotten, but a broken enemy is a monument, a living testament to the consequences of crossing the line. "You like to walk tall, Vinnie?" Bumpy asked softly. "You like to strut down the avenue in your three-piece suits? You like to wink at people after you hurt them?" Bumpy swung the stick low. It moved with terrifying speed. The wood connected with the side of Vinnie's left knee. The sound was horrific. It was the sound of ligaments tearing and cartilage shattering. It was a sound that made the men watching cover their ears. Vinnie didn't just fall. He collapsed as if his leg had been deleted from existence. He hit the floor with a scream that tore his throat raw, a high-pitched, animalistic keen that echoed in the rafters. Vinnie rolled on the floor, clutching his ruined knee with his good hand, curling into a fetal ball. He was sobbing uncontrollably now, begging for his mother, begging for God, begging for death. "That," Bumpy said, his voice cutting through the screams, "was for the walk my wife had to take to the hospital. Every step she took in fear, you take a step in pain." Bumpy walked around the writhing form of Vinnie Moretti. He looked at the other leg, the good leg, the one Vinnie was desperately trying to pull away. "Please, no," Vinnie whispered, seeing Bumpy's eyes. "Not the other one. I won't be able to walk. Please, have mercy." "You gave my wife no mercy," Bumpy said. "You gave my unborn child no mercy. Why should I give it to you?" "I'm begging you!" Vinnie shrieked. "That's the point," Bumpy said. He raised the hickory stick high above his head. He put his back into it. He delivered the final blow with the force of a sledgehammer. The right shin snapped. Vinnie's body arched off the floor, seized by a convulsion of pure agony, before slamming back down into a limp, trembling heap. He passed out for a second from the pain, his eyes rolling back in his head, then woke up again, screaming. Bumpy tossed the hickory stick onto Vinnie's chest. It clattered against his ribs, but Vinnie didn't react. He was broken, completely, utterly dismantled. The room was silent again, save for Vinnie's wet, ragged breathing. Bumpy stood there, adjusting his cuffs. He looked at the 20 men who had watched their boss get taken apart. They looked terrified. They looked at Bumpy not as a man, but as a force of nature, a storm that had swept through their lives and left nothing but wreckage. "Take him to the hospital," Bumpy said to the room. His voice was conversational, as if he were giving instructions on how to file a tax return. "Tell the doctors he fell down the stairs. It happens. People are clumsy." He walked over to Sal, the capo who had tried to draw his gun earlier. Sal flinched, backing away until he hit the wall. Bumpy reached out and straightened Sal's tie. "He lives," Bumpy said to Sal. "You make sure he lives, because I want him to remember this. Every time it rains and those bones ache, I want him to remember Mamie Johnson. Every time he reaches for a cane to get out of bed, I want him to remember not to touch things that don't belong to him." Bumpy leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that Sal would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. "And if I ever hear that he, or you, or any of you have stepped 1 foot into Harlem again, I won't bring a stick next time. I'll bring a shovel." Bumpy turned and walked toward the door. Whispers opened it, grinning savagely. Silas followed, keeping his gun trained on the room until the very last second. They stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. The heat hit them, but after the cold violence of the club, it felt good. It felt like life. Bumpy took a deep breath. He felt light. "You okay, boss?" Whispers asked, looking at the blood on Bumpy's sleeve. "Never better," Bumpy said. "He's gonna be in traction for a year," Silas noted, lighting a cigarette with a steady hand. "He'll never walk straight again. You crippled him." "He crippled himself," Bumpy said, getting into the car. "I just helped gravity do its job." The ride back to the penthouse was quiet. Bumpy watched the city slide by. He saw the kids playing in the fire hydrants, the old women sitting on stoops fanning themselves. Life went on. The world kept turning. But the balance had been restored. He had sent a message that would ring louder than any gunshot. When he walked into the apartment, Mamie was waiting for him. She was sitting in the armchair by the window, a book in her lap that she hadn't been reading. When she heard the door open, she stood up, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. She saw the blood on his sleeve immediately. "Bumpy!" she cried, rushing to him. "It's nothing," he said, catching her hands before she could touch the wound. "Just a scratch, a barber's nick." "And the other guy?" Mamie asked, searching his eyes. "Is he?" "He's alive," Bumpy said. "He's at St. Vincent's by now." Mamie let out a breath. "You didn't kill him?" "No," Bumpy said. He led her back to the chair and sat her down, kneeling in front of her. "I didn't kill him, but he won't be bothering us anymore. He has a long recovery ahead of him. A very long recovery." Mamie looked at him. She knew what that meant. She knew the code of the streets. Vinnie Moretti wasn't dead, but the man he used to be, the arrogant, strutting peacock, was gone. In his place was something broken. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise to protect you," Bumpy said, kissing her hand. "I intend to keep that promise. Now, I need you to do something for me." "Anything." "I need you to tell the maid to throw this shirt away," Bumpy said, looking at the blood stain. "And then I need you to help me pick out a name for the baby. I'm thinking maybe Vincent is off the list." Mamie laughed. It was a sound of pure relief bubbling up from her chest. "Yes," she said, wiping a tear from her eye. "I think Vincent is definitely off the list." They sat there for a long time, watching the sun go down over the city. Bumpy held his wife's hand, feeling the small movements of the baby. He knew that peace was an illusion. He knew that violence was a cycle that never truly ended. He knew that somewhere out there, a new wolf was already being born, hungry for his crown. But tonight, the wolves were silent. Tonight, the king sat on his throne, and the queen slept safely in her bed. Epilogue. 6 months later. The winter snow was falling softly on the streets of New York, blanketing the grime in a layer of pristine white. The city looked peaceful, hushed under the cold embrace of January. But inside the private wing of St. Vincent's Hospital, there was no peace. The radiator in room 4B hissed and clanked, fighting a losing battle against the chill drafting in from the window. Vinnie Moretti sat in a wheelchair, his back to the door, looking out at the gray sky. He was thinner now, much thinner. The hospital food and the constant grinding pain had stripped the flesh from his bones. His face, once round with the fullness of youth and good food, was gaunt, his cheekbones sharp enough to cut. His expensive suit, brought to him by Sal, hung loosely on his frame like a costume on a scarecrow. His right arm was out of the cast, but it was stiff. He couldn't fully rotate the wrist. He could hold a spoon, but he couldn't hold a razor. Not steady enough to shave with. Not steady enough to kill with. But it was his legs that drew the eye. They were encased in heavy braces, steel rods running down the sides of his trousers, vanishing into orthopedic shoes. He reached for a glass of water on the sill. His hand trembled. He hated the trembling. He hated the weakness. He hated the way the nurses looked at him with pity. He hated the way his own men looked at him with doubt. The door opened, and Sal walked in. He shook the snow off his coat, bringing a gust of cold air into the room. He looked tired. The business had suffered while Vinnie was in the hospital. The other families were circling like sharks, smelling blood in the water. They sensed weakness. "Boss," Sal said, nodding. "We got the collection from the Bronx. It's light again." Vinnie didn't turn around. "Of course it's light. They know I'm in here. They think I'm finished." "We can send some guys," Sal started, trying to sound tough. "No," Vinnie snapped. He turned the wheelchair around. The movement was jerky, awkward. The rubber wheels squeaked on the linoleum. "We wait. We rebuild. We get strong." He looked down at his legs. The doctors said he would walk again, but he would always need a cane. He would always limp. He would never be able to run. He would never be able to dance. Every throb of pain in his knees was a message from Bumpy Johnson. Every stiff movement was a reminder of the hickory stick. Every time it rained, his bones sang a chorus of agony. "Did you hear the news from Harlem?" Sal asked, hesitantly, twisting his hat in his hands. "What news?" Vinnie asked, his voice a dry rasp. "Mrs. Johnson," Sal said, looking at the floor. "She had the baby. A girl. They say she's healthy. They say Bumpy threw a party that lasted 3 days." Vinnie's hand tightened on the armrest of the wheelchair. His knuckles turned white. The hate that had been smoldering in his gut for 6 months flared up into a roaring fire. It burned hotter than the pain. He thought of Bumpy Johnson, holding his new daughter, smiling, living his life as a king. He thought of Mamie Johnson, the woman who had looked at him with pity on the stairs, and he thought of himself, trapped in this chair, broken and humiliated. Bumpy had made a mistake, a fatal mistake. He had thought that breaking Vinnie's bones would teach him a lesson. He thought it would make him humble. He thought mercy was a strength. But it hadn't made him humble. It had made him hateful. Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.